Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Becoming Anchored podcast. My name is Laura Deneen. I am one of your hosts, and I am joined by the lovely Devin Cappy today. And I'm really excited for what she has to share. If you are new to this podcast, we are about two things on this show. So we talk a lot about the pain and some of the suffering of being a human being and all that that entails. And Lauren and I both share some of our lived experiences just around some of the pain that we've been through. And then we also have the amazing privilege of sitting with clients on a daily basis. And we love, love, love that work. And so we are here to share some of the insights that we have gleaned over the years with you all and some of the hopefulness that our careers allow us to see and the bravery that our careers allow us to see on a daily basis. If you are not in the state of Tennessee, this is not meant to be your therapy. This is meant to really just provide information to you and hopefully validation for your experiences. If you are in the state of Tennessee, we would love to work with you. And so please reach out for support. But if not, we encourage you to find someone local to you. So without further ado, I'm here to welcome Devin to the show today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Of course. Yeah. So, for those of you that aren't aware, Devin is actually a master's level intern with us here at Anchored Counseling Company. She is in her, I think, second semester with us seeing clients and has just really done phenomenal work. And we are so grateful to have her on the team. And we were chatting a little bit before we started recording about what we wanted to talk about today. And we thought about the topic of the journey to becoming a mental health therapist and all that that entails, because Devin is quite literally smack dab in the middle, I guess more on the tail end of your journey at this point. But yeah, we thought that would be a pertinent conversation, whether you are a therapist listening, or maybe you're curious about like how your therapist got their degree. I think it would be really helpful, Devin, for you to dive in and share some of your insights.
Yes, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. You're always so sweet. And but yeah, for me, like this topic is near dear to my heart as you said, like I am smack dab in the middle of my internship right now. And just thinking about like this topic in general, I thought it'd be helpful just to talk about kind of like the background work of like what it even means to like be in your internship or like how to even get to this space in the first place. And so, at least in my program, I'm currently in a 3-year program. And at the last year of my program, you are involved in what's called your practicum and internship. And that involves like direct care with clients or patients, depending on like the location that you work in. And so that involved like having an interview process with whatever site that you're at. And I was fortunate enough to be able to land working with Anchor Counseling Company and then starting seeing clients right away. And that's a mixture of like observing sessions, either with like Laura or Lauren in my experience, and then also seeing clients on my own. And that also involves having supervision with a supervisor from my school, and also at Anchored as well, to make sure that I'm learning, if I have any questions, and then also just hearing the feedback of other colleagues of my own. And I think with that process, at least speaking from my own experience, I have been struggling a lot with, I would say, like imposter syndrome and like perfectionism. I think that stems partially from like my own temperament, my own experiences, but then also just in the space of becoming a therapist. And I don't know if you can relate to that, Laura, but the pressure that is I put on myself of having to have all the answers or doing everything perfectly or just right in order to have the best care for my clients. And I didn't know if you had any like thoughts to speak to that of like your own experience being further along in your career than myself.
Oh my gosh, yes. And so, yeah, I mean, it is a lengthy process to become a therapist. So you do have to go to college or university first, and then you do have to apply and get into grad school. And then you do an internship in grad school. And then there's also like post licensure before you even get your
Mm-hmm.
license. And so there's a couple different tracks here in the state of Tennessee, but there's a licensed professional counselor, marriage and family therapist, clinical social worker, and there's like a minimum of, I think, 2 or 3 years for each credential. And so, yeah, it's a lengthy process. It's also, like you said, it's a vulnerable process because, it exposes a lot of maybe our stuff, especially as we're starting to see clients. I remember when I saw my first client over 10 years ago, about 10 and a half, 11 years ago. And I remember running into the therapist who was like practicing right beside me. And he had been practicing probably for 5 or 6 years at that point. And so he'd had quite a bit of experience. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. And just like my heart was beating so fast. And yeah, it is nerve wracking. And especially in a private practice setting, because we do a lot of oversight here at Anchored Counseling. We do a lot of additional supervision. And Devin is getting wonderful supervision with our clinical director, Lauren, who also co hosts this podcast. But it's a lot on the therapist. And I think it evokes a lot of, just feelings, understandably so, because, you want to do a good job in your internship and you're also learning so much. You want to make sure, like you said, that you're providing your client with like wonderful care, which, excellence in care is one of our values as a company. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot to hold as someone newer to the field. And it's also people's mental health, right? So it's like,
Right.
this is like literally we're holding their brains and helping them live healthier, hopefully, lives, and that's a lot to hold.
It is. And I think you said that really well of just like as you're talking, I was thinking about like the permission as well, like the permission of being in the therapist role of being my authentic self. And how does that show up in the room? And how does that show up like outside of the room when I'm trying to practice what I preach in talking to my clients? And, like I said, like a continual process of giving myself permission to be imperfect,
Yeah.
though, like I'm a therapist, but I'm also a human. And also then not preaching that, but like speaking truth to that with clients in session of them being able to live like their authentic lives and being human at the end of the day.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it's a delicate blend of, obviously, we want to be professional, we want to be relational, we want to make sure that our clients are getting what they need out of session, that they are actively like making changes in their lives and meeting their goals, while also learning so much as a provider. And I know even in supervision I've done with you of like, oh yeah, I would do that differently, or and that's what I really appreciate about you is you have a sincere humility that already is the sign of a phenomenal therapist. I am more concerned owning this practice and just different experiences that I've had in the field when therapists say that they know it all. I'm like, okay, well, first of all, you don't. Second of all, that is concerning to me because even though I've been in the field for over a decade, I recognize that I still have a lot to learn. And there is, I think, a beauty in the humility that you have because it allows you to like recognize maybe areas of growth in yourself. It also allows you to be a lifelong learner. And I think your clients are the ones that benefit from that.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you. That's so sweet to hear, and just I would say likewise as well. Like, and I think that that's something that's so powerful to note of like wherever you are like in your therapy process, either as like a client or as a therapist yourself, that like that learning, like you said, is like a lifelong journey, and that learning doesn't have to be perfect. There's no perfect way to learn, and there's so many different styles. I think in order to be able to progress towards your own personal goals and professional goals.
mm,
And I like in thinking about like my experience like in school, really trying to take a step back and giving myself grace to be able to make mistakes. And I know like as I've been more involved like in the therapeutic process in room, that that's something that's really hard for me to do.
yeah,
And taking like a bird's eye view of like why is that, and just giving myself self-compassion, like I said, grace to be able to just figure out like why that is, and then being able to come out the other side of it and not judging myself for maybe the ways that I've been in the past, and then giving also myself the encouragement and praise like you just gave me of being able to take a step back in the first place, one, and then two, being able to like look at myself at the end of the day and be like, did I do the best that I could in
yeah,
that moment with the skills that I have, with the lived experiences that I've had, with the support that I've had? Did I do the best that I could? And even at the end of the day, if I don't, that's an opportunity for me to grow. and
Sure.
looking at either mistakes, or if you want to label it failures. I don't really like to use like that language, but really looking at failures, quote unquote, as mistakes and or opportunities to grow, not as something that's negative, which I think in and of itself I wanted to pose to you of really looking at, I think from like a societal view of, especially being, I think, a woman in like modern day society, of having it all together and having all the answers and doing everything perfectly, which I think in the society view doesn't leave room for mistakes, doesn't leave
Yeah.
room for growth necessarily.
Yeah, and I hear all of this and I agree with you. It can, when if we are maybe perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, that's the language that I personally like to use. We can still have that shame or that fear response of like, "Oop, I just messed up." What we try to instill in our staff, and I think that you've embraced this so well, is like leaning in of like, okay, even if I do make a mistake, they're like we need to disclose that, right? B, we can lean in, we can grow through it, we can learn from it, we can ask ourselves what we might do differently next time. And yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, there's a lot of pressure, I think, especially at your stage in your career to be perfect and, to I don't know, have it all together. I don't necessarily know that like if you are a recovering perfectionist that like voice goes away completely. Now I do think that there's like a sense of confidence that comes as you hone in on your skill set. I tell the team that it's like both an art and a science being a
Mhm.
therapist, right? And yeah, it is tricky because we do walk the line in our field of like we absolutely want to be professional. Now at what point does that cross over to like putting pressure on ourselves to be perfect? I think you could ask 100 different therapists and you would receive 100 different answers. So I don't necessarily know that I have like the perfect answer, nor should I, right? Today as we're talking about perfectionism. But yeah, I mean, I hear all of this and I think that's something that I welcome the team's feedback around of like how do we show up as humans and like in a real authentic way with while also remembering that we don't have to be perfect. And this is the idea that like two truths can be true at once.
Mm.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to a client this morning about like I stopped at Starbucks and got a coffee and I was telling her that my daughter has been up at 5 a.m. recently, like for the past 2 weeks or so. And I've just noticed a little bit more fatigue in myself. And I think I told you that yesterday or yeah, and it's hard because I'm juggling a lot, and especially as women, like you said, it's like we've got, families and possibly children and not that men don't have responsibility. I do think there's more like unspoken responsibilities for women. And
Mhm.
I shared that with her. She was like, "Oh my gosh, what flavor Starbucks did you get?" And I told her my order and I was like, "Yeah, my daughter, has been waking up at 5 and so I just felt like I needed a little bit more of a pick me up this morning." And this client is actually pregnant and it was really validating to her for to hear my experience and we were able to chat about some of her concerns either in pregnancy or postpartum. So I do think it opens up the the option for us to self-disclose, to be human in the room with clients. I do think there's a safety that is felt by our clients when they recognize that we're not perfect
Mhm. Yeah.
while also believing that we can help them. We just talked about this in our team meeting, right? Like our clients want to know that we can help them. Like they're in pain and they're most likely suffering and they come to us because they want to feel better. And so I think it's this delicate balance of like being human, but while also like, hey, I see your pain and this is what I'm thinking for your treatment plan and this is how I think I can help you. It's a difficult road to walk and it's a delicate balance to hold all of that together.
Yes, I wholeheartedly feel that. And especially you're saying like the part of like the self-disclosure piece and like the walking the line and balance of the professional and like just being a human in general piece. And I know that like in grad school, and I'm not sure like to, to listeners if they can relate if they're also in grad school in the mental health field or like allied professionals of really not wanting to like lean into self-disclosure, which I can understand that, right? Like of the professional aspect and like knowing what to self-disclose, what not to self-disclose, when to self-disclose, right? Like I think that all is very nuanced and depends on the client that you're working with. But I also think that sharing common human experiences, fears, worries, times of joy, times of like really like any emotion is, I think, so beneficial to like the therapeutic process, just because like you said, like that harnesses, I think, a sense of safety like in the room and within the relationship that hopefully like our clients are getting outside of the therapy room as well, and or modeling with the client of like what that looks like to receive information like that from someone else that they trust, and or having a space in order to be able to express their worries, fears, or times of joy, for example, with another human. And I think that there's a lot of peace, at least from my experience, that comes from hearing other people talk about like their mutual struggles that I share. And it's so interesting to think about too. Of I know I definitely can fall into this of feeling like, oh, I'm the only one in the world that feels this way, or I'm the only one that's ever experienced that, or no one can feel the way that I feel to the level that I feel. And then just having these open conversations with someone that I trust and I feel safe with, for example, you, Laura, of that I'm reminding myself time and time again, even as a therapist myself, of that, no, like maybe like someone doesn't have the exact experience that I have, but there are common emotions and experiences that all of us humans experience in different parts of our lives. And that brings me a lot of peace, especially I think as like a mental health therapist, like intern, of it's easy, at least for me, to be able to, put that all inside and like look externally. And I guess that leads into me thinking about the comparison as well, that I think that doesn't necessarily go away or is specific to just being an intern, but the comparison game of the same concept of like, oh, well, I'm the only one that feels this way. Look at that person over there. They have it all, they have it all together. Look how perfect their life is. And just being able to take a step back and thinking about the fact that, okay, well, I'm looking at another human. I don't have all the facts. Like, I don't have all the information here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and speaking to self-disclosure, there are therapists that self-disclose too much and it is
Mhm.
inappropriate, right? And
Right.
there are some examples of bad therapy that have been provided. And I know that sounds like a judgment, but like therapy has a code of ethics for a reason.
Hmm.
And then there are therapists that self disclose like very rarely. And so I think in grad school, it's really tricky to know. And we almost have to use our own internal compass, set of values to discern, okay, is me sharing with my client my Starbucks coffee order going to hurt or harm them? No. Why am I self disclosing right now? Okay, this client is expecting a baby. There's a lot that we're
Hmm.
working on around that. And so, yeah, I think the intent is really important with self disclosure. Checking it out with, your supervisor is something that's important. And,
Yeah.
and we're working with humans, right? So we can't predict what's going to come up in the therapeutic space. And I think that's what's tricky about our profession, right? Because if someone's training to be a doctor, they know, okay, this is the antibiotic that we start with if somebody has strep throat.
Hmm.
And yes, they're seeing different humans, but there's a little bit more of a clear cut A plus B equals C versus in the therapeutic space. You don't necessarily know what you're walking into in each and every session. Now, there can be some form of routine that comes with like really getting to know a client and having some of that consistency and longevity in the relationship. But especially for newer clients and even newer therapists, that can be tricky to discern some of that self disclosure piece. And yeah, the comparison doesn't go away per se, but I think healthy therapists learn how to respond to it, right? When
Hmm.
it does show up, if we are in the process of comparing ourselves to other providers, or maybe we notice like a strong inner critic around the care that we've provided. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily go away. It's more about like, okay, can I learn to respond to this differently? I think. And comparison tells me if I notice that I am comparing myself to a different provider, that tells me that I admire something in that provider.
Yep.
And perhaps I would like more training in the area that they're specialized in. Or maybe I can learn from that provider. And like, I still go to a lot of continuing education because I like hearing how other providers talk. I like hearing the language that they use. I have an individual supervisor that I still get supervision with, even though I don't necessarily have to, because I value her input. And I think that's like full circle back to that humility and back to that like ongoing learning process that is really important as a therapist.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I was just thinking everything you're saying. I was like, totally, yes, totally, yes. And I think you like nailed like the hammer on the head with like the leaning into right like that balance between professionalism and like the humanity piece, and that there is a lot of gray when it comes to being a therapist and in the therapeutic space. And at the end of the day, being able to like look at like really like the context and like the why you're doing something or why you're implementing a certain intervention with the client, why you are self-disclosing, why you're not. And I know that that can be, at least from my experience, easy to kind of go into this rabbit hole or tailspin of like why, right? Like
Mm,
and or second guessing. But I also think, like you said, that's why it's so important to be able to have, I think, like a safe space in order to build in safe persons, such as like your supervisor, other colleagues, like other like staff that like you're working with, and maybe you're collaborating care with other providers to be able to have like those like open and honest, like what if questions or like time to be able to process. And also too, I think therapists having their own therapists to be able
yeah.
to
Yeah.
process through not only what the process is like as being a therapist in the first place, but also you're circling back to what we've said this whole podcast of like you're a human at the end of the day. And I think being able to have like that safe person, I think also being, like you said, to be able to have your own set of skills, which can be different for everybody, to be able to sit with the uncertainty
Yeah.
of like learning a new role, being in like the therapeutic world that does have such grayness to it. I know for myself, I really like to listen to music. And so, like, if I'm finding a time where I'm feeling like my anxiety is really heightened, or like maybe I'm tapping on my, perfectionism in a way that's not serving me in the way that I would like it to, being able to recognize in the moment through my own work that that I've done, like through like body sensations, through like naming the emotion of being like, hey, like, you know what? No, I'm gonna have a dance party. Like even if I'm by myself, I'm gonna have a dance party and just be able to let out, like literally, like let out all the anxiety that I'm having. And I think as someone who is working through her own perfectionism, of even just doing an exercise like that by myself can feel so silly in my mind, but the more that I'm doing it, the more I'm forcing myself to do things that are quote unquote silly. I'm allowing myself or the permission to be able to be imperfect or to not have it all together, whatever that looks like for me, even if it is in the confines of my own home by myself. And I think that those subtle things that I'm doing behind the scenes, or like anyone is doing behind the scenes, is they build up over time. And like you said, being
Absolutely.
able to like sit with that uncertainty and be able to sit with that perfectionism if that comes up later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because I think a lie that we oftentimes tell ourselves is like, oh, the perfectionism wouldn't be here if I were in a different career. And the reality is, like, that is certainly not true. Right. And so I do think that's important to note because I've caught myself in that version of kind of a cognitive distortion, I guess you could call it. Because even if we were to change careers and we figure out that maybe being a mental health therapist is not for us, which I'm not saying that will be the case for you, but our stuff shows up no matter what we are
Right.
doing or no matter what environments we are in. And so, yeah, that reframe for me has been really helpful of like, okay, this is something that I can work on right here, right now. And yeah, how can I validate myself? How can I get support when I need it? How can I recognize when I do mess up and learn and grow from it? How can I remind myself, like you said, that I'm doing the best that I can? I think this podcast is really applicable whether you are a mental health therapist or maybe you're starting a new career or you were earlier in the process of figuring out what you want to do. There's lots of different like takeaways from what we've talked about today. So I really appreciate your insight and your vulnerability with me today.
Thank you. And thank you again so much for having me. It's always such a joy to be able to, to talk with you, and just I'm learning so much being here at Anchored and like throughout my process of being an intern, and, just to literally apply what we were talking about on the podcast today of just giving myself the grace that we're all human, and that it's just so important to be able to have those safe people and safe spaces in order to be human.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell us, would you like to close with an affirmation or some homework for our listeners?
Yeah, and thinking about an affirmation, I actually was thinking about this with a recent conversation I had with my uncle, and specifically around perfectionism and being goal oriented and like living up to these standards that I put on myself, and like he puts on himself as well, but that progress does not have to equal perfection. Like progress is actually the opposite of perfection.
Mm,
And just that simple statement, which, as I'm saying, is like it's really not that simple when you're actually implementing it. But I think that that's the point: is that progress is not perfection, nor does it need to be, and it's actually the opposite. And I think that's something that's really powerful. And I try to remind myself, whether I'm in the therapeutic space or not.
yeah. So that can be like the affirmation and the homework, right? To remind yourself like of all the progress that you have achieved and or maybe not even achieved, but all the progress that is there and to lovingly remind yourself that things don't have to be perfect for us to have very meaningful lives and very meaningful careers. So,
Yes.
yeah. Thanks so much for listening to the Becoming Anchored podcast, y'all. And thank you, Devin, for being on the show. If you all are interested in working with Devin, you can find her on our site at anchoredcounselingco.com. And yeah, we will see you next time. Take good care.